12-year-old Jane Harper stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her fingers trembling as they traced the edge of her eye patch. The whispers, the stares, the quiet cruelty at Westfield Middle School had chipped away at her confidence, making her feel invisible, except when she wished she was. Hope was slipping through her fingers like sand. But what Jane didn't know was that her life was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. Because that very evening, none other than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson would be knocking on her front door. And what he'd say and do next would alter her world forever. Before we dive into this powerful story, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you love inspiring stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, because this one is about to take you on an emotional journey. The morning sun stretched long shadows over the quiet suburban streets as Lewis Harper carefully steered the family car through the steady rush of traffic. In the back seat, 12-year-old Jane fidgeted, her fingers constantly reaching up to the eye patch covering her left eye. The tension in the car was thick. Each passing minute brought her closer to the doors of her new school, a fresh start, they called it. But to Jane, it just felt like another chance to be the girl everyone whispered about. Her mom, Rebecca, sat in the front passenger seat, stealing glances at her daughter, her eyes full of both concern and encouragement. "Mom." Jane's voice was barely above a whisper, quivering as she spoke. "What if the other kids make fun of me? What if no one wants to be my friend?" Rebecca turned to face her, her expression softening. "Sweetheart, I know it's scary. But try to remember, everyone feels nervous on their first day. And your eye patch? It doesn't define you." Jane tightened her grip on her backpack straps. "But it's not just about today, Mom. Remember what happened at my last two schools? No one sat with me at lunch. Kids whispered behind my back like I couldn't hear them. I tried so hard to make friends, but it never worked." From the driver's seat, Lewis glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed. "I know it's been tough, kiddo. But this is a new school. A fresh start. Just give it a chance, okay?" Jane nodded, but her heart wasn't in it. Her mind drifted back to happier times. "I miss my friends in Thailand. Nobody cared about my eye patch there." Rebecca and Lewis exchanged a look before Rebecca turned back to Jane. "Sweetie, you spent most of your life in Thailand. It was home. But the culture here is different. It might take some time, but that doesn't mean you won't find people who see you for who you really are." Lewis nodded. "And honestly, sometimes having a few real friends is better than trying to be friends with everyone. Quality over quantity." Jane sighed, her eyes following the passing houses outside the window. Everything felt easier in Thailand." Lewis cleared his throat, his voice turning more serious. "I know, Jane. But moving back here hasn't been easy on any of us. Finding work, keeping up with expenses, it's been a struggle. And then there's your medical." Jane's fingers brushed the edge of her eye patch. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do we still have enough money for my surgery next year?" Lewis's expression softened instantly. He reached over and rested a reassuring hand on hers. "Of course, sweetheart. We've been saving every penny. And I promise, when the time comes, you'll get the best care possible. Nothing is more important than that." A flicker of hope crossed Jane's face. "And after the surgery, can we go back to Thailand? To visit my friends?" Lewis gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. There was a hesitation, a tiny pause that Jane caught. He masked it with a warm smile, but she already knew the answer before he spoke. "We'll do our best to save up for a trip," he said, his tone careful. "It might take some time, but we'll make it happen." Jane's lips curved into a small, wistful smile as she gazed out the window. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But that tiny unspoken hesitation lingered in her chest like an unanswered question. As they pulled up to the school entrance, her anxiety flared again. Students swarmed towards the doors, chatting, laughing, belonging. Jane shrank back into her seat. What if the teachers don't like me? She whispered. What if the other kids are mean? Rebecca reached back, squeezing Jane's knee. Honey, listen to me. Your dad and I will be right here in the parking lot all day. If you need us for anything, if something happens, you just call. Okay? Jane took a shaky breath, trying to hold onto her mother's words. She nodded, straightening her shoulders as Louis pulled up to the drop-off zone. You've got this, kiddo, Louis said, offering her an encouraging smile. Remember, you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. Jane inhaled deeply, clutching her backpack. This was it. With one last breath, she pushed the car door open and stepped into the crisp morning air. And as she walked towards the school entrance, she had no idea, absolutely no idea, that her life was about to take a turn she never saw coming. As Jane walked toward the school entrance, she could feel her parents' eyes on her back, a quiet, steady presence that gave her the courage to take each step forward. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. If she did, she might not keep going. And then she was gone, disappearing into the building. Louis and Rebecca remained in the car, both staring at the entrance, lost in their own thoughts. The steady stream of students continued to trickle in, and Louis found himself watching every interaction, scanning for any signs of trouble, any whispers, any glances, anything that might signal what Jane would face inside those walls. After a while, he exhaled and broke the silence. I don't see anything worrying. Everyone seems normal. Rebecca nodded, though her eyes never left the door. That's good. But it's early. We should stay vigilant. Lou sighed, leaning back in his seat. I keep thinking about how much we've put Jane through. 3 schools in 2 years. It's a lot for any kid, let alone one dealing with all this. Rebecca's expression tightened. Don't remind me. Those non-refundable school fees. That money could have gone toward her treatment. Hey, Louis said softly, reaching over to take her hand. We can't dwell on past decisions. We did what we thought was best. Right now, the only thing that matters is finding the right place for Jane. Rebecca squeezed his hand, but didn't look convinced. I just worry that we're not pushing her hard enough to adjust. Maybe it's culture shock, but at some point, she has to learn to navigate American school dynamics. We can't keep comparing everything to Thailand. Louis frowned slightly. She needs time. Pushing too hard could backfire. Silence settled over them again as they both stared at the school entrance. Minutes turned into hours, the parking lot slowly emptying until only a handful of cars remained. Lou checked the time. We can't sit here all day. He started the engine. There's a waterfront market nearby. Let's get some fresh air, grab an early lunch. We'll still be close if Jane needs us. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. Fine. But let's keep our phones on full volume. The waterfront market was alive with energy, the scent of salt and grilled seafood thick in the air, the chatter of vendors mixing with the cries of seagulls overhead. For a moment, Louis and Rebecca allowed themselves to get lost in the lively atmosphere, their worries about Jane temporarily pushed aside. Rebecca pointed to a stall lined with glistening shellfish. Look at those grilled squid. Remember how much Jane loved them in Thailand? Lou smiled. She begged for them every time we ate out. Maybe we could surprise her with some for dinner. They wandered through the market, eventually settling in a small brunch spot filled with other parents. They ordered coffee and oysters, idly watching the tide roll in. Nearby, a group of young mothers were deep in conversation, their voices carrying over the hum of the crowd. I swear, that school's Facebook page is out of control, one woman said, shaking her head. Parents post about every little issue like it's some kind of crisis. Another woman scoffed. But sometimes that's the only way to get things done. Have you seen how slow the system is? If it doesn't go viral, no one cares. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, the conversation hitting too close to home. She leaned toward Louis and whispered, maybe we should go. I don't want to hear any more of this. Louis nodded, glancing at his watch. It's almost lunchtime at Jane's school anyway. Let's head back and check in. As they stood, Rebecca's eyes landed on a food stall selling spicy grilled squid salad. Oh, Jane would love that. Should we get her some for lunch? Louis hesitated. Lunch? Won't she be getting food from the cafeteria? Yes, but something familiar on her first day might comfort her, Rebecca countered. Louis frowned. I don't know, bringing her special food might make her stand out more. We want her to integrate, remember? Or it might make her feel a little less alone. Rebecca's tone was firm. After a brief debate, Rebecca's maternal instincts won out. They bought the squid salad and drove back toward the school. As they pulled up to the cafeteria entrance, another disagreement arose. I should take it directly to her, Rebecca said. Louis shook his head. Won't that draw attention? We don't want to embarrass her. I won't embarrass her. I'll just drop it off with the cafeteria staff. She won't even see me. Louis exhaled, reluctant but knowing there was no arguing with her. Fine. But be quick. As Rebecca stepped out of the car and headed toward the school doors, Louis watched her go, his fingers drumming anxiously on the steering wheel. He knew she only wanted what was best for Jane. They both did. And as he sat there waiting, he could only hope that somewhere inside that building, Jane was finding her own way, one step at a time. Rebecca found the cafeteria easily, her footsteps quick but uncertain. Spotting a friendly-looking lunch lady behind the counter, she approached with a careful smile, holding out the takeaway container. Could you make sure this gets to Jane Harper in 7th grade? She asked, keeping her voice steady. The lunch lady took the container with a warm nod. Of course, dear. I'll make sure she gets it. Before leaving, Rebecca hesitated. She let her gaze sweep across the cafeteria, clean, calm, students chatting at their tables like any normal school day. The sight eased some of her worries. Maybe, just maybe, this place would be different. Returning to the car, she slid into her seat beside Louis, her heart feeling a fraction lighter. They settled back into their silent vigil, watching and waiting, both hoping that the familiar taste of home would bring their daughter a moment of comfort on her first day. The shrill ring of the school bell cut through the afternoon air. Louis and Rebecca sat up straighter, eyes locked on the entrance as a flood of students spilled out. Their heads turned frantically, scanning the sea of backpacks and chatter, searching for Jane's familiar face. And then, they saw her. Their hearts sank. Jane walked alone, her shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on the ground. The hopeful, nervous energy from the morning was gone, replaced by something heavier, something that settled in the air like a storm cloud. She climbed into the back seat without a word. Rebecca forced a smile, twisting in her seat to face her. Hey, sweetie. How was your first day? Silence. Jane buckled her seatbelt, eyes still downcast. Louis tried next, keeping his voice gentle. Did you make any new friends? How were your classes? Nothing. The quiet in the car grew unbearable as Louis navigated through the after-school traffic. Rebecca and Louis exchanged worried glances, their earlier optimism crumbling with every second Jane refused to speak. The drive home stretched in tense silence, Jane staring out the window, lost in thoughts she wouldn't share. As soon as they pulled into the driveway, she was out of the car. No words. No glance back. Just a rushed escape into the house. Rebecca hesitated only a moment before following. She found Jane in the kitchen, standing by the sink, pouring herself a glass of water. Honey, Rebecca said gently, keeping her voice light. Did you like the squid salad? We were at the market earlier, and when we saw it, we thought of you. Remember how much you loved it in Bangkok? Jane flinched. Rebecca barely had time to register the change in her daughter's face before her fragile composure shattered. Her face crumpled. Tears spilled over, silent at first, then uncontrollable. Gut-wrenching sobs. Her fingers trembled, her grip on the glass slipping. It fell, crashing to the floor, shards scattering in every direction. "Oh, sweetheart," Rebecca whispered, rushing forward, pulling Jane into her arms. Jane clung to her mother, her cries muffled against Rebecca's shoulder, her small frame shaking. Louis appeared in the doorway, his expression etched with worry. He knelt, carefully collecting the broken glass, his silence a quiet acknowledgement that Rebecca needed this moment with their daughter. Then Jane choked out the words that made Rebecca's blood run cold. It was awful. Rebecca's arms tightened. "What happened, baby?" Jane struggled for breath between sobs. Her words came in fractured, painful gasps. "My teacher. Mrs. Roselle, she made fun of me." Rebecca and Louis exchanged a sharp, horrified glance. "What do you mean?" Rebecca's voice wavered. Jane sniffled, wiping her face. "During class introductions, she looked at me and she said I looked like a pirate." Rebecca stiffened. And then Jane's breath hitched. "She said pirates steal and kill people." Rebecca's stomach dropped. Louis's jaw clenched. His hands tightened into fists. Everyone laughed at me. The words sliced through the air like a knife. Rebecca held Jane tighter. "She said what?" Her voice shook with barely contained rage. Louis stayed quiet, his face dark with anger, but his silence was dangerous. Jane wiped her nose with the sleeve of her shirt. It got worse after that. Rebecca swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice calm. "Tell me everything, sweetheart." Jane hesitated, then the dam broke. They wouldn't stop calling me pirate. I tried to laugh it off, but they just kept saying it. She choked on a sob. And then, there was this future dream job thing. I didn't know about it, so I didn't have a costume. Rebecca stroked her daughter's back. "That's okay, honey. Not everyone dresses up for those things." Jane shook her head. "But there was this boy, Roy. He came as a boxer, and Mrs. Roselle said it was great, said he was dressed for success like his dad." Her breath hitched again. Tears poured fresh. "But when I said I didn't have a costume," she said. Jane squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the words out like they physically hurt. She said, "Oh, maybe you can be a pirate when you grow up." And everyone laughed again. Rebecca froze. Louis's hand stopped moving. A deadly silence filled the kitchen. Jane's voice dropped to a whisper. "She made me participate." Rebecca pulled back slightly, searching her daughter's face. "What do you mean?" Jane sniffled, her voice barely there. "She said my eye patch was costume enough. And she made me be the bad guy, for Roy to practice fighting." Silence. Then, the sound of Louis exhaling sharply through his nose, his hands gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping him from flipping the entire kitchen over. Rebecca felt something inside her snap. The warmth in her voice was gone. "We're calling the school." "Right. Now." Louis's voice was low, dangerously controlled. "No." Rebecca's head whipped toward him, startled. "No?" Louis met her gaze, his eyes dark with an emotion that sent a chill down her spine. "We're not just calling." He placed the last piece of shattered glass onto the counter, his movements deliberate. "We're going in." Jane's breath hitched as she forced out the words. Everyone laughed. They laughed while he hit me. It was humiliating. Rebecca's face twisted, a painful mix of heartbreak and rage. "Jane, that's bullying. What she did is bullying, and it's not okay." Louis's hands curled into tight fists, his knuckles turning white from the sheer force of restraint. He took a deep breath, struggling to steady himself before speaking. "Jane, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice low but filled with an unshakable determination. "That's not just wrong, it's completely unacceptable. No teacher has the right to treat you like that." Jane nodded weakly, sniffling as she wiped at her cheeks with trembling hands. "I couldn't take it," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I ran out of the classroom crying. I spent the rest of lunch hiding in the principal's office. Her voice cracked, I never even got to eat the salad. As if suddenly remembering, Jane reached into her backpack and pulled out the now soggy container of squid salad. She peeled the lid open, the cold smell of seafood filling the kitchen. Despite its unappetizing state, she picked up a piece and began to eat hungrily, her tears mixing with the food. Rebecca instinctively moved to stop her, concerned about how long it had been sitting out. But Louis gently held her back. They watched in silence as their daughter devoured the meal, the only piece of comfort she had left from a day that had taken everything from her. Louis pushed back from the table, his jaw clenching as he paced, running a hand through his hair. "Mrs. Roselle," he muttered, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "What kind of teacher does that to a child?" His fists tightened again. He forced himself to stay calm, for Jane's sake. But the storm brewing inside him was impossible to ignore. "That teacher humiliated you, Jane. She made you a target. This isn't something we're letting slide." His voice dropped, firm and undeniable. "I'll be talking to the school first thing tomorrow." Jane froze. Panic flared in her tear-filled eyes. "No, Dad." Her voice was urgent, desperate. "If you say something, it'll just get worse. They'll tease me even more." Rebecca turned to Jane, cupping her daughter's face gently, forcing her to meet her gaze. "Honey, standing up for what's right is never easy. But it's important. What Mrs. Roselle did wasn't just mean, it was wrong. And we have to make sure she doesn't do this to anyone else." Jane stared at her, eyes red, swollen, shimmering with a new kind of determination. And then, she said something that made Rebecca's heart stop. "I'm not going back." Her voice was firm, unyielding. "I'm not going back to that school with this eye patch. I can't. Not again." Rebecca and Louis exchanged a glance, momentarily stunned by the finality in her tone. "Sweetheart," Rebecca began, choosing her words carefully, "I know today was awful, but—" "No, Mom." Jane cut her off, shaking her head. "You don't understand. I can't face them again. I just won't." She pushed back her chair, stood up abruptly, and walked toward her room, leaving the empty container on the table. "I need to be alone." Her voice trembled. Then came the soft click of her bedroom door. Rebecca and Louis sat frozen, the weight of Jane's words pressing down on them like a heavy fog. Finally, Louis exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. "This is beyond unacceptable." Rebecca's voice was laced with anger. "That teacher needs to be held accountable. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Louis stood abruptly, already strategizing. He would deal with the school first thing in the morning. But before either of them could say more, the buzzing of Louis's phone broke the tense silence. Rebecca glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's from your office." Louis sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Of course it is." He muttered something under his breath, then turned to Rebecca, guilt flashing in his eyes. "I'm sorry, darling. Duty calls. I took the whole day off, but you know how it is." He pressed a soft kiss to Rebecca's temple. "We'll talk more about this later. Right now, let's give Jane some time to rest. And you, too, don't overthink this. We'll figure it out together." With that, he headed upstairs, already deep in conversation as he answered the call. Rebecca sat there, staring at the empty chair where Jane had been, her mind racing. She wasn't going to let this slide. Her eyes flickered toward the hallway, where Jane's door remained tightly shut, a physical barrier between her and the world that had just broken her. Then, a thought hit her. The market. She remembered the conversation she'd overheard earlier that day about the power of social media. About how, sometimes, it was the only way to make people listen. A spark of determination lit inside her. She stood abruptly, walked to the living room, and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then, she began to type. She poured everything out. Jane's medical condition. The way she had been mocked in front of her classmates. The bullying. The teacher's cruel, humiliating words. She made sure to omit the school's name and Mrs. Roselle's, focusing instead on the bigger picture, the reality that so many kids like Jane face every single day. The need for change. For compassion. And then, she attached a recent photo of Jane. She hesitated, just for a second. Then, with a deep breath, she clicked post. Rebecca closed her laptop, her heart pounding. For the first time that day, she felt something other than helplessness. She felt ready for war. Rebecca hesitated before posting Jane's story online, unsure of what response it might receive. Exhausted from the day, she drifted off on the couch. When she woke up at 4 p.m., curiosity pulled her toward her laptop. Her eyes widened. Her post had gone viral. Tens of thousands of reactions flooded in: support, empathy, outrage. But one comment stood out. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. If they want to bully her, they'll have to deal with me first. Jane gasped. "The Rock?" he commented. As they marveled at the unexpected turn of events, Rebecca's phone buzzed. A direct message from Dwayne Johnson himself. He wanted their address. He was coming. Tonight. Excitement filled the house, but Louis remained cautious. "Are you sure it's real?" He checked the profile again. Verified. Official. It was him. The evening passed in anxious anticipation. Jane kept glancing at the street. Then, the doorbell rang. Rebecca froze mid-stirring the dinner pot. Louis looked up sharply. Jane's eyes went wide. Rebecca opened the door. And there he was. Dwayne Johnson. Larger than life. No entourage. No cameras. Just him. "Good evening, Mrs. Harper. I hope we're not intruding." For a moment, Rebecca couldn't move. Then she stepped aside. "Please, come in." Jane's mouth hung open. "You actually came." Dwayne knelt to her level. "Of course I did, Jane. When I heard what happened, I knew I had to see you myself." Over dinner, he listened, truly listened. He heard about Jane's struggles, her medical condition, her dreams. Then, he made her a promise. "Tomorrow, things will be different. I'm coming to your school." Jane's voice trembled. "You mean, you're really going?" He nodded. "And I'll make sure everyone knows bullying, from students or teachers, is not acceptable." Then, with a warm smile, he leaned in. "And for the record, your eye patch? It's pretty badass." He told her a story about a fighter he once knew who had only one eye but moved faster, smarter, stronger than anyone else. "What I'm saying, Jane, is that you've got something special. Don't let anyone make you feel less because of it." Before leaving, Dwayne made another promise to help with Jane's medical treatment. Louis hesitated. "Mr. Johnson, that's incredibly generous, but please." Dwayne's voice was soft but firm. "I want to. Not for attention. Just because it's the right thing to do." Jane hugged him tight, her earlier despair replaced by something new. Hope. That night, as she climbed into bed, she whispered, "Mom, Dad, I think I'm ready for school tomorrow." The next morning, the Harper family pulled into the school parking lot, nervous but hopeful. Jane scanned the lot. No Dwayne. Her excitement flickered. "Where is he?" Rebecca squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, honey. He'll come." The school bell rang. Jane hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Okay." She stepped out of the car, walking into the building with a quiet strength. Inside the office, Rebecca had her own mission. "I'd like to speak to Principal Harway." Now. She was met with empty reassurances. A strict anti-bullying policy. A possible misunderstanding. Rebecca clenched her fists. My daughter was humiliated. In front of the entire class. By a teacher. That is not a misunderstanding. Before the principal could respond, the secretary burst into the room. Sir, you need to see this. Dwayne Johnson just arrived at the school gates. Harway paled. Rebecca smirked. Shall we go greet him? A school standoff. The hallways buzzed as students and teachers crowded the windows. Dwayne stood at the entrance, towering beside Louis. His presence was magnetic. As the principal rushed out, Dwayne's warm expression turned serious. I'm here for Jane Harper. Harway stammered. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office. No. Dwayne cut him off. What happened in that classroom needs to be addressed. Right here. Right now. They entered Jane's classroom. Mrs. Roselle's face drained of color. Mr. Johnson. I don't understand. Rebecca's voice cut through the tension. You called my daughter a pirate. You made her a target. And you made her a punching bag. That's not teaching. That's humiliation. Dwayne's gaze hardened. Is that a security camera? He pointed to the corner of the room. Principal Harway nodded. Yes, all classrooms have them. Dwayne smiled. Great. Then we can review the footage. Mrs. Roselle visibly panicked. Her shoulders slumped. I may have gone too far. Dwayne's voice softened slightly. Intent doesn't erase impact. What you did hurt a child. Turning to the students, he said, this is a teachable moment. Bullying, whether from kids or teachers, is never okay. The class hung on his every word. Real strength isn't about hurting people. It's about lifting them up. It's about using what makes you different as your power. Then, addressing the principal, he added, I expect consequences. Not just for Jane, but for every student in this school. Harway nodded stiffly. Mrs. Roselle will be placed on administrative leave. And we'll be making changes to our anti-bullying program. Jane's eyes shimmered with relief. For the first time, she felt seen. A public movement. As they left the classroom, a crowd had gathered. Reporters, cameras, news vans. Dwayne raised a hand, quieting the commotion. I'm here today because of Jane Harper. But this isn't just about her. It's about every kid who's ever felt like they didn't belong. The crowd listened in awe. Bullying is not just kids being kids. It's not harmless. It's a problem. And it's time we start treating it like one. He turned to Principal Harway. Today, you're making a commitment to real change. And I will be watching. Harway nodded quickly, now fully aware of the weight of the moment. Jane hesitated, then stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but firm. If you're being bullied, don't be afraid to speak up. And if you see it happening, don't stay silent. A wave of applause erupted. Dwayne looked at her proudly. You're incredible, kid. A new beginning. As Dwayne prepared to leave, he turned to the Harpers one last time. This is just the start. There might be challenges ahead, but you're not alone. With final hugs and words of encouragement, he walked toward his car. As he drove away, Jane stood taller. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. And with an entire community behind her, she knew one thing for sure. She was going to win.